guys, Matt here. Happy Christmas, season's greetings. It's the 22nd today, so we've just cleared the solstice yesterday. So just a couple of days to go before the big one here in Britain. To the rest of you around the world, if anyone's listening, I wish you well. I hope this finds you in a state of good mental and physical well-being and health. So I thought I'd just give a little bit of a talk to any sort of new subscribers or people that aren't really familiar with us and what we are, really. Just give you a bit of a sort of tour of the history and the origins of Cheltenham and UK philosophers, because it's not always been as it is, and I'm sure it won't always be as it is going into the future. So it's nice sometimes, I think, to just sort of reflect on, where we've come from, and and that sort of reflection helps perhaps to some degree shape the future, because I haven't done everything that I've wanted to, but I've done a lot more things than I hadn't that I wasn't really expecting. So yeah, let's just talk this through then. Okay, so sort of cut to the chase in terms of really why I did all this, and you know what? It's frustration with foolishness, right? And by foolishness, I mean ill-reasoned worldviews. I mean inauthentic positions on things. I mean scripted, unexamined things. As many of you might know, that an unexamined life is not worth living, right? According to either Plato or Socrates. And I've always felt that, and I've always felt this bitterness of the idea that if people could just think a bit more, and be educated about how to, then we might just somehow survive this absolute catastrophic mess we found ourselves in. And so for me, there's something extremely pressing about philosophy and about its place in science, religion, communities, politics. I think in some sense you might say that politics is kind of is like applied morality, it's applied ethics, which of course is a philosophical discipline. So it's kind of like, well, let's try and save the world, and let's try and do what we can as individuals, express and try to sort of flourish our own potentialities in pursuit of that goal, in pursuit of education, in pursuit of reason, right? Because I think that's the only thing, that's our kind of lighthouse in the storm. And we're in a crisis at the moment. I don't have the answer, right? And I mean, I've had a shit year, frankly, right? So, it's been kind of, at times it's been difficult to focus on the world around me, given the challenges I have sort of internally. But, the whole thing seems to be going to pot, doesn't it? Right? The whole of the world seems to be caught up in this kind of polarized sort of, right versus left, mudslinging. Everyone probably knows I'm somewhat left-leaning. Got some sort of quite extreme views about politics and so on, which probably don't really want to go into right now. But let it be said, I'm not I'm not going to vote reform, just as a sort of fairly obvious. If you want to position me, then I'm not I'm not voting reform, at least. So I'm quite terrified about the direction of travel of the world, and some of what I've been doing has been kind of an escapism, to be honest. It's like, let's just go and look at metaphysics and science, because the world's too ugly and painful to face, really. But you see, the thing is that I've always felt that metaphysics has a big part to play in people's self-image, in humanity's self-image and humanity's worldview, if there is such a thing, the zeitgeist, if you like. Okay, and because it seems far easier to persuade people to stick a uniform on and behave in a sort of regimented, robotic fashion and kill other people, if these soldiers are just organic machines with no meaning. And when you've got sort of leading philosophers saying that consciousness is just an illusion and morality is probably an illusion and free will doesn't even exist and all this kind of stuff, it's tantamount to saying that it really, really doesn't matter. And in some sense, those organisms are better off dead, because life is just an irrelevant sort of painful struggle that has no telos associated, no purpose or goal associated with it. There's no spiritual dimensionality. So I think that we've been in the grip of this kind of deterministic, cold, materialistic self-image and cosmic image for quite some time, and I think we're slowly but surely wresting ourselves free of that grip. So I wanted to be part of that journey, and I think there's a hell of a lot of really, really freaking interesting and cool stuff happening in empirical science now that does cast doubts upon the sort of materialist paradigm. And it's a tricky one, because the moment you start complaining about materialism, there'll be a bunch of people that just assume that you're a wooist, right? So I'm into crystal healing and all this stuff, right? I don't know whether crystal healing works or not. I suspect it probably doesn't, but I don't have any evidence in front of me. If someone wants to come at me with some evidence in support or against it, then by all means. But it's just not an area of interest of mine, right? And nor are many of the sort of paranormal areas of study. I think the UFO thing has got extremely interesting, and there's obviously some shit going on up there, right? I mean, I've seen with my naked eye, I've seen things moving up there, which they're not satellites, they're not planes. I'm not going to jump to any conclusion about what they are, but I've seen them with my friend Richie, just staring up into the sky. Did you see that? Yes, I did. And there were about 5 or 6 one evening. Okay, this is just an urban setting. It's not like we're on a hill somewhere in the wilderness. So they're probably drones, but some of them were doing some strange maneuvers, and they didn't look normal. Okay, but anyway, I'm sort of trailing off now. So the history of Chelsov is really built around that kind of core philosophical complaint, almost, that people don't really think about their world and themselves enough, and their role in the world and what they ought to do, and so on and so forth. And so many of us are just occupied with these kind of rent-paying. We're basically still feudal serfs. Most of us don't own our own territory. We're not allowed to go and build anything in the woods because it's all privately owned by some landowners. People think we say we're free, but you're only free if you operate within these very tight constraints. I mean, I've met people that have literally just chosen to not participate because there's so much freaking bullshit, and I can't blame them. I mean, I've worked in central London for Deutsche Bank, so I know a bit about the pinstripes and the suits and boots, wandering around, having fabulous careers and making lots of money and all this kind of stuff. And I'm not saying these guys were okay. Actually, I mean, so a bunch of these guys were really, really good fun. If it'd be cool if they ever listen to this. I doubt they will. They're quite busy. But they were really, really quite cool people. But there was just something facile about all this sophistication. And it just wasn't for me. And I didn't have the heart in the sort of analysis and programming I was doing, because it was literally just financial rate sets and things like that, trying to interpolate and sort of try and predict and so on and so forth. And, it just seemed hollow to me. Extremely individualistic, and without any real sort of, it didn't feel like, I mean, there'll be tons of arguments in here against me, but it just didn't feel relevant. Whereas the work I've done in mental health and acute and commissioning NHS services and stuff, that feels meaningful, because it feels like you're actually impacting people's lives directly. Anyway, so that's a bit of waffle there. But so yeah, it's really because, I mean, a bunch of my friends didn't even know what philosophy was. And during COVID, I basically just didn't quite know what to do with all this extra time we had on our hands. So I took to walking and studying. I've got a degree in philosophy and sort of masters in computer science and MPhil in AI and stuff like this, right? So I'm sort of quite, fairly sort of technical. But interesting in terms of philosophy, I'm more sort of intuitive, and I quite like metaphysics. And not so keen on all this kind of like nihilistic existentialist stuff. I don't know. I think the philosophy should be about the world, and we shouldn't obsess too much about our own kind of, I don't know, sort of internal sort of existential crises and things like that. We should just focus on actually learning something about nature, right? So I'm perhaps more with the Levins than I am with the Foucaults and people like that, right? So people aren't thinking enough. There's been a dumbing down of society. Nobody's watching anything interesting anymore. I mean, I remember Brian McGee, the philosopher, used to have a program on BBC Two. So you could be eating your dinner and he'd be interviewing some expert on Wittgenstein or something. And so I want to bring philosophy back into the mainstream. Okay, so I was also lonely. I thought, well, actually, most of my mates just don't get this at all. I was trying to explain idealism and the idea that consciousness is fundamental to some of my friends. They just look at you like you're some kind of fucking moron, right? And then you try and explain, well, actually, materialism, the way we view the world at the moment, is based upon a metaphysical, position assumption, really, that stuff is made of tiny little marbles, or even if it's made of, physical fields or something like that, it's weighable and measurable, and that's the only thing that's real, right? And I mean, they just looked at me as like I was some kind of madman trying to explain idealism. And these aren't daft people, right? They're just people that aren't familiar with philosophy. They've never really questioned, the prevailing view of the world, the prevailing scientific view of the world, or cultural view even. They just sort of get along with it and just think, well, it's kind of like when I was a kid. You think that things have always been there, right? So the phone boxes, the Bobby on the beat, you think, hang on, you're emerging into a world that felt quite concrete, and you feel subject to it. And then, of course, as you get older, you realise actually you create your own freaking goddamn world by the company you keep and the manner of your habits and stuff that you do, right? It's up to us to create this world, right? Of course, there's something that looks objective out there that we travel through, space-time, all this kind of jazz. But, when you've got conventional mainstream neuroscientists, people like Anil Seth saying, well, we live in a controlled hallucination, and just about everybody else agreeing, so neuroscientists, biologists, they're talking about these self-models that we develop to be able to negotiate the world. You end up realizing that the world is an act of co-creation. It's not something you wander through. It's something you actually kind of invent, right? Based on, what seems to be some objective realm that gives rise to sensory input. But as Philippe goes all the way and has some kind of pragmatic solipsism on the go, where he says, well, just you can't say anything about the external world. And I get where he's coming from, but that kind of skepticism as well sort of just leaves me feeling a little bit hollow. I'm down with McKenna when he says, look, grant us a free miracle and we can explain everything else. I mean, that's what he says science does. So, just obviously he was kind of leveling the playing field, saying actually the materialist scientists are just as wacky as the idealists, and possibly mystics, right? So yeah, all of this and loads of other stuff as well is kind of in the mix when it comes to asking why I did this in the first place. But let's just talk a little bit about the facticity as well. So we've got the Facebook group that was founded in December 2023. So prior to that, there'd been a few sort of meetings down the pub, some friends coming round. We said, look, let's structure some of these conversations and set aside a couple of hours to discuss neuroscience, biology, physics, philosophy, because it was kind of, there were certain people whose nerves it got on. So if I dove into a conversation with one or two people, and we'd end up kind of almost cordoned off from the rest of the group, who had no idea what we were discussing, and it's like we were talking Greek to them, right? So we said, let's try and do something a bit more structured. So we ended up having, you say, right, now we're going to discuss philosophy, right? And then the people who weren't interested can fuck off and do their own thing. And so we did that for a while, and me and my mate Richie, and we talked about the idea of getting podcasts together and things like that. We were going to focus, me and Richie's focus was going to be something a bit more kind of towards UAPs and things like that, because that's something that he's still exceedingly interested in. I'd love to talk to him about it for the channel or something like that one day, because he knows a lot of stuff about all this, right? And it's not completely wacky. If there's any field of study that is currently called woo that probably isn't these days, it's the UAP stuff, right? I mean, I've got some fairly wacky views that I think there's been creatures of some sort here with us all the time, right? Hence ancient depictions of fairies, angels, goblins, leprechauns, the whole damn thing. Patrick Harper talked about this, of course, the mythologist who wrote the Philosopher's Secret Fire. One of my guests, fantastic guy. I think he smoked during the interview as well, which I know isn't generally regarded as cool these days, but there's something quite eccentric English gentleman going on about that, so I did as well. But I think these things have always been here with us, and this is just a new modern sort of lens on it. I also think that a lot of these drones are actually just drones, right? And they're being controlled by someone, right? A lot of these, there's airports being closed down in Europe, right? So you can't deny that. That's not UFO stuff. That is actual on-the-ground reporting. There's shit going on in the sky that our air traffic controllers can't manage, right? And they can't say for certain what's going to happen, what's going on in the airspace. So you have to fricking close these places down. What's that? I don't know. Anyway, so that's how it all. The very nucleic or embryonic form was me and Richie and Hatsy and Anna and a bunch of other guys just sort of sitting around discussing interesting things. Harriet brought. She's got some interesting background in art, and she had shown an interest in the relationship between art and mathematics and so on, and brought out loads of books. And so we've been looking at this kind of stuff for a while. So I thought, let's take this online. Let's build a Facebook group called Cheltenham UK Philosophers. Actually, there's a little bit more going on here as well, to tell the truth, because I think I'd emailed a couple of possible guests, and I just got nothing in reply. So I thought, well, in parallel with all this, why don't we build this group? Get some numbers together, get a community going, make ourselves look a bit more kind of respectable, beef us up a bit, and then invite the guests. And it worked, right? We called ourselves Cheltenham UK Philosophers because we're a local, national, now international group of like-minded individuals, right? I think that's like-minded, open-minded, philosophical individuals, really in pursuit of the truth. A good philosopher should be pursuing the truth, right? Or at least some kind of wisdom, perhaps. That's not the best way to frame it, but or a methodology, right? But so I'm waffling a bit here, but that's where we're coming from. To get people to think more, to get people to have more of an interest in the wondrous, beautiful thing that is the world as it is, right? So the world without dragons, elves, and UFOs and stuff, in and of itself, is magical and complex and deep and intelligent. In my view, it's teleological, it's purposive, and so evolution is an intelligent process in itself. It's not just random mutation. We've now got more evidence from biology. Dennis Noble, there's the Lamarckian view is back in the room, right? And one of my childhood heroes, well, sort of teenhood, 20s-hood heroes, Richard Dawkins, pretty sure he looks like he was wrong about the absolute insistence on pristine Darwinian principles. So random mutation, basically. It's not random. Right? Mike Levin's demonstrating that cells can do more than you might think. So frog skin cells can now form little colonies. They're calling them xenobots. And they're doing novel things that haven't been evolved, right? So where does that come from? And so that's of huge interest to me as well. So it was also about popularizing those scientists, right? So the Levins, the Hoffmans, the Fristons, so people that were doing things of interest to me, right? but it's not just about that. It's about getting all worldviews. So I've had a mythologist. We've got physicists. I'd love to have a mathematician at some point, or certainly a philosopher of mathematicians, a philosopher of maths. Yeah. So I should also talk about a bit more about the kind of the online experience that myself and Chelsoff have been on the last couple of years. So yeah, prior to the creation of Cheltenham UK Philosophers, I was a member of several online groups to do with philosophy and so on. So there's Bernardo Kastrup, sort of Donald Hoffman groups. Also joined one called the Hermetic Idealists, founded by Stephen Wallard. I mean, it's a huge group now. They're over 10,000 members, I think. Obviously, not all of them active all the time, but a sturdy following. And that group, a bunch of guys from that group came across and sort of joined up with Cheltenham UK Philosophers. So we took a bunch of sort of idealists and in something sort of quite mystically minded people, because the Hermetica group was essentially all about Hermes Trismegistus, the guy also known as Thoth, I think, in Egyptian fables. He wrote a book called the Hermetica, and it's kind of like an early form of idealism, and the parallels between the two sort of are just obvious, right? For instance, in the Hermetica, there's the principle of mentation or mentality. So basically, everything is rooted in mind. Okay, there's a bunch of other sort of principles, duality, gender, and so on and so forth. But we don't need to go into those. But it's a fascinating group because it kind of combines history, mysticism, Gnosticism, maybe non-dualism. Certainly, I'd suggest. So it's got dotted lines with Advaita Vedanta. But it's kind of it welcomes people from all sort of faiths and disciplines and so on. We've got Rosicrucians in there, Muslims, Christians, atheists. It's one of the most cosmopolitan groups I've been a member of, and not everyone in the group kind of agrees with hermetic idealism either. So there has been some quite sort of robust discussions in there. I think it is now aligned mainly with that particular belief system. And Stephen does lots of sort of online lectures outlining the principles and so on. But also more than just that, just metaphysics generally, idealism. I wanted something a bit more neutral. I wanted a space where people from all isms could feel sort of relevant and welcome, and then nobody would be sort of laughed at. And obviously, with the obvious exceptions, from my point of view, I mean, I just will not house fascists, right? And yeah, we could get into what my definition of that is, but I'd rather not. It's just pretty obvious to me. Anyone with sort of any kind of unfounded prejudices against a particular group, just not welcome. You've got to keep an open mind and remember that each and every single human being on this planet was randomly sort of thrown into a particular sort of demographic, belief system, but we're all still human, and we all still have fears and hopes and wants and dreams and sadness, right? When you see tragic incidents abroad and stuff, people cry. Wherever you go, people cry, right? So we're all soft as shite. We're man the hunted, not the hunter. And so that first, that's the only thing that we insist on is respect, mutual respect, and so on. And it should be obvious, really. I mean, I'm more down with the sort of the pagan directive that it just says do no harm. I think that's pagan or Wiccan. Rather than the complex sort of 10 commandments, just do no harm, right? And then, of course, there can be a philosophical discussion about what constitutes harm, and so on. But let's just trust a bit of human moral intuition, and generally that's worked, right? We've had some heated debates, we've had some real fallouts actually, and people have been removed, and there's been some sort of boundaries crossed, shall we say. And broadly speaking, the admin have agreed on things, but sometimes even the admin have been split on things, right? We're a bunch of humans. We're going to get into a tangle, especially with philosophy sometimes, I find, because people are very passionate. A person's metaphysic, if they've invested a lot of time and thought and reflection on it, it's their life to a degree, you know, because it affects the way they see their world. And so to have the emotions tangled up with a metaphysic is, you know, quite a dangerous place to be, as we've seen in human history. It's certainly vulnerable. So epistemic humility is very important. Mine, I hope, has grown. I hope I've got more, a bit more studious, I think, perhaps. But you know, a long way to go. So much other stuff going on as well. But you know, I do try to, as Matt Segal discussed, I do try to live my philosophy as well. Not always successfully, right? But you know, all I ask of people is that they hear me out. Not, you know, I mean, I don't want to give the wrong impression. I'm not running around philosophizing everyone all the time. But you know, I can't get on with people that won't be reasonable with each other or with me. And it's as simple as that. And I've been into situations where people have asked me to choose, and I don't even want to be put in that position. So usually I you know, even if I have a leaning towards one party over the other, I will still request that both parties just cease from the propaganda and the conflict and so on and so forth, and don't involve me. And that's been a problem at times because, you know, I'm like at least the figurehead of the group. I mean, I'm the lead admin on the group. It's you know, I built this group, so I have responsibilities there. But these days, to be honest, it kind of runs itself. The admin are cool. I should mention them. So thank you to you know, Luke and Arlindo and Harriet. We don't see or hear much from Harriet these days, but she's still there spiritually. Chrissy has had some health problems and stuff, but you know, again, she's still there spiritually. She's been to a bunch of the socials. We've got, thank you, Linton, for, I mean, he's not an admin. I've offered it to him, but you know, he's a prolific poster. He's he can be, you know, he's a tight reasoner. He doesn't like loose arguments and things like that, and you know, and so it's you know, it's he's quite a tough customer. But we, you know, we've got Jim who's been awesome. He's been to the socials. Arlindo obviously has now gone on and done his own podcast and so on. Paul Byrne, haven't heard much from him lately, and Jean, of course, she offered the coffee shop for use once. That didn't didn't come off. But you know, I love all you guys, and thank you so much for being in the group, and to all of the new members that have come over the last sort of few months. If any of you are listening to this, it's unlikely. Thank you so much for joining. I mean that's the thing with all of this. We've got the two worlds. We've got the world of the online community, which is still ticking along nicely, and new materials being added, new members joining. About 710 now, I think. But we've got the online sort of YouTube thing. I've also got Instagram and TikTok running. They're not doing very well, but you know, apparently you've got to sort of speculate to accumulate. You've got to have a presence everywhere, and then it kind of, they feed each other, right? Because I do want to, you know, I'd love to do this for a living, frankly. I mean, at the moment it's part-time, it's a hobby. I'm trying to get more professional. I think I've got more professional. A long way to go. But yeah, I'd love to do this full time. I mean, Chrissy is a paying member, and so I really, really appreciate that. And she has been almost right from the start. And you know, I need to develop more materials for members and so on and so forth, make it a more attractive thing. But it's $1.99 a month, right? It would really help, please. But if not, don't worry about it. It's always going to be free, apart from the more sort of sensitive stuff, my own private musings about things, which requires a membership, $1.99 a month. Okay, let's just see how that goes.